On Mother's Day, my son looked at me across the brunch table and asked, "Mom, why did you change the house deed?" I froze with my coffee cup halfway to my lips. Change the deed? I had never touched it. Then I remembered the security alert notification sitting unopened on my iPad. Slowly, carefully, I unlocked the screen. And when I opened the security footage, I saw my daughter-in-law inside my private file room while I was in the hospital. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're watching from." Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes it walks into your house carrying flowers for Mother's Day brunch. The dining room smelled like cinnamon pancakes, fresh coffee, and lilies when my family started falling apart. Mother's Day used to be one of my happiest mornings every year. My late husband Walter always woke before sunrise to cook breakfast himself, even though he burned bacon almost every single time. He believed effort mattered more than skill. "Families remember love," he used to say, "not perfect cooking." After Walter died 2 years ago, my son Andrew tried continuing the tradition. Every Mother's Day he brought flowers. Every Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law Claire took pictures for social media beside the dining table, like we were the perfect suburban family. And maybe once upon a time we almost were. That Sunday morning looked beautiful from the outside. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. Fresh roses sat in the center of the table. Mimosas sparkled beside polished silverware, while soft jazz played through hidden speakers Claire insisted we install during the kitchen remodel last year. The remodel I never asked for. At 71 years old, I had lived inside this house for nearly 40 years. Walter built most of it himself one summer after working construction jobs during the day and renovating at night. Every wall inside this house carried part of our life. Andrew learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Walter planted the maple tree outside the dining room window when we paid off the mortgage. This house wasn't property. It was memory. And lately, Claire talked about it like an investment opportunity. Brunch started pleasantly enough. Claire complimented my blouse. Andrew poured coffee. We laughed about an old vacation disaster involving Walter accidentally locking us outside a cabin in Colorado during a snowstorm. Normal. Family conversation. At least on the surface. Then Andrew suddenly looked toward me and asked, "So why did you change the deed without telling us?" The entire room froze. I blinked slowly. "What?" Claire immediately looked down at her plate. That was the first thing I noticed. Not confusion. Not surprise. Avoidance. Andrew frowned slightly. "The house deed." I stared at him. I didn't change anything. A strange silence settled over the table. Claire picked up her mimosa too quickly. Andrew looked genuinely confused now. "But the county office mailed a transfer confirmation last week." Cold moved slowly through my chest. Transfer confirmation? No, that was impossible. Walter handled every legal document carefully before he died. The house belongs solely to me now. We made sure of it after his second surgery. I suddenly remembered the notification alert waiting on my iPad upstairs. 3 days earlier, my home security system flagged unusual activity inside the study hallway while I was hospitalized overnight for observation after chest pains. At the time, Claire told me it was probably a system glitch. Now something inside me tightened. "I need to check something," I said quietly. Andrew watched me carefully as I stood from the table. Claire didn't look at me at all. That frightened me more than anything. I walked slowly upstairs toward my bedroom while sunlight stretched across the hallway floor. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. Like somewhere danger had quietly entered without permission. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the iPad from the nightstand. Security alert. Interior motion detection. Timestamp. 11:42 p.m. The night I was in the hospital. I opened the footage. At first, the hallway looked empty beneath the dim security lighting. Then Claire appeared. My stomach dropped instantly. She moved carefully toward Walter's old study carrying something in her hands. Keys. My private file cabinet keys. I stopped breathing for a second. No. Claire glanced over her shoulder before unlocking the office door. Then the camera captured her disappearing inside. 3 minutes later, she walked back out carrying a folder from my legal cabinet. My heart began pounding violently. Behind me I heard footsteps. "Andrew, what's wrong?" he asked softly. I turned the screen toward him without speaking. and I watched my son's entire world begin to collapse. Andrew stared at the iPad screen without blinking. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The hallway. Security footage continued playing silently in his hands while Claire moved in and out of Walter's study like someone who already knew exactly where to look. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. 11:42 p.m. The night I was in the hospital. Mother's Day sunlight still poured warmly through the upstairs windows, but suddenly the house felt cold. Dangerously cold. Andrew finally looked up at me. "What is this?" His voice barely sounded like his own. I crossed my arms tightly just to stop my hands from shaking. "That's what I'd like to know." Behind us, footsteps moved slowly up the staircase. "Claire." I turned before she reached the landing. The second she saw the iPad in Andrew's hands, all color drained from her face. That alone told me everything. Andrew stared at his wife in disbelief. "You went into Mom's office?" Claire opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched painfully between us. Then finally she whispered, "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because guilty people always say the exact same thing when evidence finally corners them. Andrew looked back down at the footage. "You had her keys." Claire stepped forward quickly. "She asked me to organize paperwork weeks ago." "No, I didn't." My voice came out calm. Sharp. Claire froze immediately. I realized something in that moment. 4 years after Walter died, I softened myself around Andrew and Claire because I didn't want to become the difficult older mother nobody enjoyed visiting. So I stayed agreeable, flexible, quiet. And little by little, Claire began treating this house like it already belonged to her. The kitchen remodel, the new furniture, the way she referred to the upstairs guest room as the future nursery. At the time, I convinced myself it was harmless enthusiasm. Now I wasn't so sure. Andrew replayed the footage again. This time we all watched Claire unlock the filing cabinet inside Walter's office. The camera angle didn't show what she removed, but it showed enough. Andrew lowered the iPad slowly. "What were you doing?" Claire looked terrified now. Not defensive. Terrified. I was trying to help. There it was. That word. Help. People destroy entire families hiding behind that word. "What exactly were you helping with?" I asked quietly. Claire swallowed hard. "The property paperwork." Andrew frowned immediately. "What property paperwork?" Claire looked toward him. Then toward me. Then back toward the floor. Cold moved through my chest again. Because I suddenly realized this conversation had been happening behind my back for a long time. Andrew rubbed his forehead slowly. "Claire," she inhaled shakily. "The house needed better estate protection." My husband already handled the estate. But the trust wasn't modernized. I almost admired how professionally she said it. Claire worked in real estate law administration. She understood paperwork, contracts, technical language. That made this worse somehow, because she knew exactly how dangerous legal wording could become. Andrew looked confused. "What does that have to do with changing the deed?" Claire immediately answered too fast. "I didn't change it." That frightened me more than if she had shouted. Because innocent people don't rush toward denial before hearing accusations fully explained. I walked slowly toward Walter's study across the hallway. The door still stood slightly open from earlier. Inside, sunlight stretched across his old wooden desk while framed family photographs lined the shelves exactly where he left them before cancer took him away. Some mornings I still expected to hear him humming softly while balancing checkbooks at that desk. Instead, now the room smelled faintly of Claire's expensive perfume. Violation has a scent sometimes. I opened the bottom filing drawer carefully and immediately noticed something wrong. Folders had been rearranged. Walter organized everything alphabetically for 30 years. Insurance papers, tax records, property documents. Now the tabs sat unevenly. Disturbed. Andrew stepped into the room behind me. "Mom!" I pulled out the property folder slowly. Inside sat a photocopy of the original deed. And beneath it, another document. Newer. Stamped. Property transfer request initiated. My heartbeat stopped. Claire made a soft sound behind us. Andrew grabbed the papers immediately. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked on the last word. I stared at the signature line. My name sat there in digital script, but I never signed anything. Then memory hit me violently. 3 months earlier, Claire stopped by with several insurance update forms after dinner. Just routine homeowner paperwork, she said casually while handing me an electronic tablet. I barely read them. I trusted her. My stomach turned. Andrew looked at Claire in horror now. You used Mom's signature? Claire burst into tears instantly. It wasn't finalized yet. The sentence echoed through Walter's office like broken glass. Not finalized yet. Meaning she intended to finish it. Andrew stepped backward slowly. You tried transferring the house? No. I was restructuring ownership protections. For who? Claire covered her face with both hands. We were trying to secure our future. There it was. The truth finally surfacing beneath all the legal language. Not protection. Ownership. I looked around Walter's office quietly. The family photos. The woodworking tools still hanging neatly beside the shelves. The old baseball glove Andrew left there 20 years ago after high school. Walter built this house believing it would protect the family someday. Now the family itself had become the threat inside it. Andrew stared at his wife like he no longer recognized her. Then quietly, painfully, he asked, "How long have you been planning this?" Claire stood in Walter's office crying while Andrew held the transfer papers in trembling hands. How long have you been planning this? The question hung in the room like smoke. Claire immediately shook her head. It wasn't like that. Andrew laughed softly under his breath. Not amused. Hurt. Then explain what I'm looking at. Sunlight stretched across Walter's desk while dust floated quietly through the air between us. The room suddenly felt smaller than it ever had before. Claire wiped tears from her face quickly. We were only preparing for the future.
He stared at her carefully.
That sentence sounded rehearsed. Like she had repeated it to herself many times already. Andrew looked down again at the transfer request papers. The date sat clearly near the bottom. 6 weeks earlier. His face tightened instantly. This started over a month ago. Claire's silence answered him before words did. My chest hurt. Not physically. Emotionally. Because betrayal always feels heavier when you realize how long it existed before discovery. I slowly sat down in Walter's old chair beside the desk. The leather still creaked the same way it always had beneath weight. Walter spent years sitting here balancing bills, planning retirement, protecting this family. And now his office had become the center of deception. I suddenly remembered something from last winter. Claire insisting I should streamline my legal paperwork because older homeowners often struggle with estate planning. At the time I thought she was being thoughtful. Now every conversation replayed differently inside my head. Andrew looked toward his wife again. You talked to someone about this, didn't you? Claire hesitated. That terrified me. Claire. She looked down. At the floor. A property attorney. Andrew stared at her in disbelief. You hired an attorney behind Mom's back? I was gathering information. For transferring her house? Claire burst out suddenly. We live in a tiny condo, Andrew. The room went completely still. There it was. The real emotion underneath everything. Not paperwork. Not protection. Resentment. Deep resentment quietly growing over time. Claire pointed around the office helplessly. This house is enormous. You're alone here now. I felt something inside me harden instantly. Not anger. Clarity. Walter used to say greed rarely starts with money. Starts with entitlement. Andrew looked horrified. You think Mom owes us this house? No. But you tried taking ownership of it. Claire paced toward the hallway and back again, crying harder now. I thought eventually it would belong to us anyway. That sentence landed like a slap. Because suddenly I understood exactly what happened. Claire stopped seeing me as the owner of this house a long time ago. In her mind, I had become temporary. An aging obstacle standing between her and the future she imagined. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. This house belongs to me while I'm alive. Claire looked ashamed for half a second. Then defensive again. You don't even use half the rooms anymore. Andrew turned sharply toward her. What is wrong with you? I'm being realistic. No, he whispered. You're being cruel. Silence swallowed the room after that. Outside I could hear faint neighborhood sounds drifting through the open window. Lawn mowers. Children laughing. Families enjoying Mother's Day brunches completely unaware another family was quietly breaking apart nearby. Normal life continuing while ours collapsed. Claire suddenly looked toward me. You know how hard things are financially right now. There it was again. Money. Always money. Andrew frowned immediately. What financial problems? Claire froze. Too late. My stomach tightened. Andrew noticed instantly. What problems? Claire wrapped her arms tightly around herself. Nothing serious. Claire. His voice dropped lower now. Dangerously calm. I recognized that tone. Walter used it exactly twice in 43 years of marriage. Both times right before discovering someone lied to him. Claire sat heavily on the edge of Walter's couch and covered her face. The business loans got worse after interest rates changed. Andrew stared blankly. What loans? She looked up slowly. My boutique. I remembered the boutique. Online luxury home decor and lifestyle products. Claire posted constantly about it on social media. Expensive candles. Designer throw blankets. Curated living spaces. Perfect images. Perfect branding. Perfect life. Apparently all built on debt. How much? Andrew asked quietly. Claire's voice barely came out. Almost 200,000. The room tilted slightly around me. Andrew looked physically sick. You told me the business was profitable. It was at first. And then what? Claire started crying harder. Sales collapsed after the expansion. I suddenly understood the kitchen remodel now. The expensive appliances. The custom patio furniture delivered last spring. Not wealth. Image. People drowning financially often spend the most energy pretending they aren't. Andrew sat down slowly across from me like his legs stopped working. You were going to use Mom's house as collateral. Claire said nothing. And silence finally revealed the truth completely. I closed my eyes briefly. Walter worked 35 years building this home. 35 years believing family would protect it after he was gone. Instead, his absence created vulnerability none of us noticed until too late. Andrew rubbed both hands over his face. Oh my God. Claire looked desperate now. I was trying to save us. No, Andrew whispered painfully. You were trying to save yourself. The room fell quiet again. Then suddenly my eyes moved toward the small security monitor sitting on Walter's desk. The footage timeline still remained open. And something caught my attention instantly. Another timestamp. Earlier that same night. 11:07 p.m. Nearly 40 minutes before Claire entered the office. My heartbeat quickened. Because someone else appeared on the screen too. My eyes locked onto the second timestamp immediately. 11:07 p.m. 40 minutes before Claire entered Walter's office. I leaned forward slowly in the chair. Wait. Andrew looked up. What? I pointed toward the security monitor. There's another clip. Claire's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear this time. Andrew noticed too. Why are you reacting like that? Claire stood abruptly from the couch. It's probably nothing. But innocent people don't panic over security footage. My heartbeat began pounding harder as I tapped the earlier recording. The hallway camera flickered to life again beneath the dim overnight lighting. At first the house looked empty. Then movement appeared near the front staircase. Andrew froze beside me, because this time it was him. He stepped quietly through the hallway wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt, glancing toward the front windows before walking directly toward Walter's office. For one terrible second nobody breathed. Andrew stared at the screen in complete disbelief. What the hell? Claire covered her mouth. The footage continued silently. Andrew unlocked the office door using his own key, then disappeared inside. My stomach turned. No, not Andrew too. He stayed in the office nearly 12 minutes before walking back out carrying a manila folder. The timestamp glowed in the corner the entire time. 11:19 p.m. Then the footage ended. The room went completely silent. I slowly looked toward my son, and suddenly I understood something far more painful than betrayal from a daughter-in-law. My son knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Andrew stepped backward immediately. Mom, I swear. You were in the office. His face drained pale. I can explain. That sentence hurt almost worse than the footage itself. Because explanations only arrive after secrets get caught. Claire looked terrified now. Not of me. Of him. Andrew ran both hands through his hair. I thought she was organizing paperwork. Claire stared at him in disbelief. What? He turned sharply toward her. You told me Mom wanted everything simplified after the hospital stay. I watched confusion spread across Claire's face. Then realization. Oh my God, she whispered. Andrew looked at me desperately. She said you were overwhelmed handling the estate alone. The pain inside my chest deepened instantly. Not because Andrew entered the office. Because someone manipulated him using concern for me. That somehow felt worse. Claire shook her head slowly. I never said transfer paperwork. You said legal restructuring. I said estate review. The argument exploded suddenly between them. Walter used to say marriage reveals itself during crisis. Not romance. Not vacations. Crisis. Now I watched my son's marriage begin cracking open right in front of me. Andrew pointed toward the documents. Then why was my signature attached to witness authorization forms? Claire froze. My pulse quickened. Witness authorization? Andrew grabbed another page from the folder and stared at it in horror. Oh my God. I stood slowly from Walter's chair. What is it? He looked sick. There are witness signatures attached to the request. Claire's breathing became uneven. I was going to cancel it before submission. Andrew laughed once sharply. You already submitted it. Silence. Then softly Claire whispered. They said it wasn't finalized yet. They. The word hit all three of us instantly. Andrew looked up slowly. Who's they? Claire said nothing. That frightened me more than anything else so far. Because suddenly this situation felt larger than just family betrayal. Lawyers. Transfer offices. Paperwork already processed. I suddenly remembered something Walter told me shortly before he died. Never sign documents you didn't personally request. At the time I thought he was just being cautious because of his cancer treatments. Now I wondered if he sensed danger long before I did. Andrew stepped closer to Claire. Who helped you do this? Fresh tears rolled down her face. A consultant from the title office. My stomach tightened immediately. This wasn't amateur manipulation anymore. This involved professionals. Or at least people pretending to be. Claire sat back down slowly, looking completely shattered. The business debt got worse than I told you. Andrew stared blankly. How much worse? Her voice cracked. Almost $300,000 now. The room tilted around me. $300,000. No wonder she looked desperate. I suddenly understood every expensive thing from the past year. The vacations posted online. The luxury furniture. The boutique branding shoots. People drowning financially often cling hardest to appearances. Andrew looked devastated now. You were going to mortgage Mom's house. Claire burst into tears again. I thought if the business recovered, nobody would ever know. There it was again. The same poison destroying families everywhere. I'll fix it later. I'll replace it later. Nobody has to know. Walter hated debt because he believed debt eventually teaches people to lie for survival. Now I finally understood exactly what he meant. Outside, wind moved softly through the maple trees Walter planted decades ago. Sunlight still warmed the backyard patio where we used to host summer barbecues before life became complicated. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside Walter's office, trust was dying piece by piece. Andrew suddenly sat down heavily on the couch and buried his face in his hands. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then quietly, painfully, he whispered something that broke my heart completely. I brought this into your home. Andrew sat on Walter's couch with his face buried in his hands. I brought this into your home. The sentence hung heavily inside the office. Claire cried quietly near the bookshelf while sunlight continued pouring through the windows like nothing terrible was happening at all. That's the strange thing about betrayal. The world outside keeps moving normally, while your private life collapses in silence. I looked at my son carefully. At 43 years old, Andrew suddenly looked exactly like the little boy who used to cry whenever he accidentally broke something important. Walter always said our son carried guilt too easily. Andrew apologizes for storms he didn't create, he used to joke. And now here he sat apologizing for the destruction inside his marriage while I silently tried holding my own heart together. You didn't forge paperwork, I said quietly. Andrew lifted his head slowly. But I ignored things. Claire looked toward him instantly. Andrew. No, his voice came out tired. Exhausted. For months things felt wrong. The room fell silent. He rubbed both hands over his face before continuing. You kept pushing conversations about the house, the inheritance, estate planning. He looked toward her painfully. I just didn't want to believe what it sounded like. Claire's crying softened immediately, because deep down I think she knew that was true. People ignore warning signs most easily when the truth threatens the life they want to keep believing in. I slowly stood and walked toward the office window. Outside, Mother's Day brunches continued all across the neighborhood. Families laughed on patios. Children carried flowers to grandmothers. Cars lined quiet suburban streets beneath warm spring sunlight. Everything looked normal. Meanwhile, inside this room, Walter's family was unraveling around the house he spent 35 years building. I suddenly remembered the summer he finished the back deck. Andrew was 14. Walter worked 12-hour construction shifts all week, then spent weekends laying boards under July heat, because he wanted one good place where family always comes home. That sentence nearly destroyed me now, because lately this house stopped feeling like home. It started feeling like territory. Claire suddenly spoke softly behind me. I never wanted to hurt you. I turned slowly toward her. And strangely, I believed she meant it. That was the tragedy underneath all this. Most family betrayal doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with rationalization. Little compromises people convince themselves are temporary, necessary, fixable later. Then one day they wake up standing somewhere unforgivable. You tried transferring my house without permission, I said quietly. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I panicked. Andrew laughed weakly under his breath. That word doesn't work anymore. Silence settled heavily again. Then my eyes moved back toward the paperwork scattered across Walter's desk. Transfer requests, witness forms, property evaluations. One page sat, partially hidden beneath the others. A printed market estimate. Picked it up slowly, and my stomach tightened instantly. Estimated property sale value, $2.8 million. I stared at the number for several seconds. This house had become extremely valuable over the years because of the neighborhood expansion nearby. Walter knew it too, but he refused every developer offer that arrived after retirement. This house stays in the family, he always said. Now suddenly I understood exactly why Claire became obsessed with it. Not memory. Money. Andrew noticed the paper in my hands. His face changed immediately. You had the house appraised? Claire froze. I can explain. No, he whispered. I'm not sure you can. My chest ached deeply, because this wasn't emotional desperation anymore. This was planning. Professional planning. I looked closer at the appraisal date. 3 months earlier. Around the same time Claire insisted we update insurance documents. The same papers carrying my digital signature. Walter used to say fraud begins long before the crime itself. First comes observation, then preparation, then opportunity. Claire watched me reading the appraisal and suddenly looked terrified in a completely different way. Not fear of getting caught. Fear of losing something. What else did you sign using my name? I asked quietly. The room went still. Andrew slowly turned toward her. Claire. Her breathing became uneven. I only authorized preliminary paperwork. That's not an answer. She covered her face briefly. There's a line of credit application. Cold moved through my body instantly. Andrew stared at her in disbelief. You used Mom's property for a loan application? It wasn't approved yet. The desperation in her voice sounded real now. But real desperation still destroys lives. I sat back down slowly in Walter's chair because suddenly my legs felt weak. How much? Claire whispered the number so quietly I almost missed it. 500,000. The room tilted. Andrew physically staggered backward. No, Claire cried harder immediately. The business investors pulled out. I didn't know what else to do. I looked around Walter's office slowly. The family photographs. His old reading glasses beside the desk lamp. The framed blueprint of the house hanging on the wall. Walter built this place believing it would protect the people he loved. Now the people he loved nearly lost themselves trying to possess it. Andrew looked hollow now, broken in a way I had never seen before. Then suddenly his eyes moved toward the security monitor again, and his expression changed instantly. What is that? I turned toward the screen. Another alert notification had appeared. Front door motion detected. Timestamp. Today. 12:14 p.m. During Mother's Day brunch. Someone had just walked into the house. Top of form. Andrew grabbed the security monitor so quickly the chair beside him nearly tipped over. What is that? My heart immediately started pounding again. Front door motion detected. 12:14 p.m. During Mother's Day brunch. The three of us stared at the screen in silence, because all three of us had been upstairs inside Walter's office for nearly 20 minutes, which meant someone else was downstairs. Inside the house, Claire looked terrified. I thought the doors were locked. Andrew stood instantly. Stay here. But I was already moving toward the hallway. At 71 years old, fear changes shape. You stop fearing danger for yourself and start fearing what people might destroy. This house had already survived one betrayal today. I wasn't about to let another one walk through the front door. Andrew hurried down the staircase first while I followed behind more slowly, gripping the railing tightly. The house felt unnaturally quiet. No jazz music anymore. No brunch conversation. Only the grandfather clock ticking softly in the hallway below. Tick, tick, tick. Claire stayed several steps behind us, breathing unevenly. When Andrew reached the first floor, he froze immediately. The front door stood slightly open. A warm spring breeze moved the curtains gently beside it. My stomach tightened. No, iwisparat. Andrew walked cautiously into the foyer, then suddenly relaxed slightly. Oh, I blinked. What? He stepped aside, and standing near the doorway holding a flower arrangement looked just as startled as we did. My niece Rebecca, Walter's brother's daughter. She frowned immediately. What's going on? The relief inside me weakened my knees for half a second. Then embarrassment followed quickly afterward. Rebecca glanced between all of us carefully. Claire looked like she'd been crying for hours. Andrew looked furious. And I was still clutching legal paperwork in my hands. The atmosphere inside the house must have looked terrifying. I used my spare key, Rebecca said slowly. Did I interrupt something? Nobody answered immediately. Because honestly, how exactly do you explain discovering your daughter-in-law trying to transfer ownership of your house during Mother's Day brunch? Andrew finally spoke first. We're handling something. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. That obvious. Huh. Normally Walter loved Rebecca because she never feared awkward truth. She was blunt in the exact same way he used to be. At 54, she worked as a financial investigator for an insurance company in Chicago. Sharp mind, sharp instincts. Right now, those instincts were clearly working overtime. Her eyes landed on the papers in my hands instantly. Then the security monitor. Then Claire's tear-streaked face. And suddenly her expression changed completely. Concern. Real concern. Aunt Linda, she said carefully. What happened? I looked toward Andrew. Then Claire. Then finally exhaled slowly. Apparently someone tried transferring ownership of my house. The silence afterward felt enormous. Rebecca stared at me for a full second before slowly lowering the flowers onto the hallway table. Then she looked directly at Claire. Not emotional. Professional. What exactly did you file? Claire's face drained pale again. Andrew noticed immediately. You know what she's talking about? Rebecca folded her arms quietly. I know enough about property fraud to recognize panic when I see it. The room went still. Claire whispered. It wasn't fraud. Rebecca's expression didn't change at all. You used someone else's digital authorization without informed consent? Claire looked away. Rebecca nodded once. That's fraud. The word landed hard. Harder than anything said so far today. Because until that moment, this nightmare still felt like family conflict. Bad decisions. Desperation. But hearing it called fraud made everything suddenly real in a completely different way. Andrew sat heavily on the staircase. Oh my God. Claire burst into tears again immediately. I was trying to fix things. Rebecca's voice stayed calm. People commit financial crimes for that reason every single day. I watched Claire carefully. And for the first time since this started, I think she finally understood the seriousness of what she'd done. Not emotionally, legally. Rebecca gently held out her hand toward me. Can I see the paperwork? I passed her the folder silently. She flipped through the documents quickly, eyes narrowing more with every page. Then suddenly she stopped. What is this? Andrew looked up tiredly. What now? Rebecca held up one specific document. Property Equity Access Authorization. Signed digitally under my name. But beneath it sat another signature too. Witness Authorization. Andrew Collins. Andrew stood instantly. What? He grabbed the page and stared at it in horror. I never signed this. Rebecca looked toward Claire slowly. Claire started shaking immediately. I copied the witness. Approval from old refinance records. The room exploded into silence. Because suddenly everything became much worse. Identity misuse. Forged authorization. Loan applications. Walter used to say there's a point where lies stop being mistakes and become decisions. I think we had just crossed it. Andrew looked physically sick now. You forged my signature too? Claire collapsed onto the couch crying uncontrollably. I didn't know what else to do. Rebecca closed the folder carefully. No, she said quietly. You knew exactly what you were doing. Outside, sunlight still warmed the quiet suburban street while neighbors carried flowers and balloons into cheerful Mother's Day lunches. Inside this house, a family sat buried beneath legal documents and betrayal. Then Rebecca looked toward me again. And in a calm voice that chilled the entire room, she said, Aunt Linda, I think this goes deeper than just the house. Rebecca stood in the middle of my foyer holding the property documents like evidence from a crime scene. Aunt Linda, I think this goes deeper than just the house. The room fell completely silent. Even Claire stopped crying for a second. Andrew stared at his cousin in confusion. What does that mean? Rebecca slowly flipped through the paperwork again, her expression growing darker with every page. I've seen cases like this before, she said carefully. People drowning financially usually don't stop at one fraudulent document. Cold spread through my chest instantly. Claire shook her head quickly. No, I never touched anything else. Rebecca looked directly at her. You already forged 2 signatures and attempted to access home equity under someone else's ownership. The bluntness of her voice changed the atmosphere immediately. Because she wasn't talking like family. She was talking like an investigator. Andrew rubbed both hands over his face. What else could there even be? Rebecca pulled out one specific page from the folder and pointed toward a reference number near the bottom. This application links to another financial file. Claire's face went white. I noticed instantly. So did Rebecca. There it is, she murmured quietly. Andrew stood from the staircase slowly. Claire. She looked terrified now. Not emotional. Terrified. The kind of fear people feel when they realize hidden things are about to surface whether they want them to or not. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. There's another account, isn't there? Claire immediately shook her head. No, but it was too fast. Too desperate. Walter used. To say truth rarely rushes. Lies do. Andrew stepped closer to his wife. Claire. His voice sounded exhausted now instead of angry. Almost broken. Please don't make this worse. Fresh tears filled her eyes instantly. I was trying to protect us. There's that word again, I whispered quietly. Protect. Help. Temporary. People wrap ugly things inside soft language hoping morality changes shape underneath it. But it never does. Rebecca carefully set the papers down on the foyer table. Then she looked directly at me. Aunt Linda, have you noticed any strange bank notices recently? My stomach tightened immediately. Actually, yes. Small things. Letters arriving from unfamiliar lenders. Credit offers addressed strangely. A missed call last month from someone asking to verify account information I didn't recognize. At the time I assumed it was spam. Now uncertainty crawled through me. I thought it was junk mail, I admitted softly. Rebecca nodded slowly like she already expected that answer. Then she turned toward Claire again. What did you open under her information? The silence afterward felt suffocating. Claire wrapped her arms tightly around herself. A business credit account. Andrew physically staggered backward. Oh my God. I felt my heartbeat begin pounding violently again. How much? Claire whispered the number so quietly I almost didn't hear it. 70,000. The foyer spun around me for a second.
Se vendit tous en dollars.
Under my information. My knees weakened instantly and I reached for the staircase railing beside me. Andrew noticed immediately. Mom.
I'm all right.
But honestly, I wasn't. Because suddenly this wasn't only about losing trust. It was about losing safety, identity, control over my own life. Rebecca's face remained calm, but I could see tension hardening beneath it now. When did you open it? Claire looked at the floor. 8 months ago. 8 months. Which meant for almost a year. My daughter-in-law quietly built debt using my name while sitting across from me at birthdays and Sunday dinners. I suddenly remembered Claire insisting on helping me organize paperwork after Walter died. At the time, grief made everything feel overwhelming. Bills, legal documents, insurance notices. Claire stepped in so naturally back then. So helpful. Now I wondered if she recognized vulnerability before I did. Andrew looked physically sick. You stole Mom's identity. I was going to pay it off. His voice cracked sharply. That doesn't make it better. The sound echoed through the foyer hard. Enough to silence everyone. Andrew rarely yelled. Walter used to say our son inherited too much softness from me. Which was probably why Claire learned she could hide uncomfortable truths behind emotional explanations for so long. But now something inside him was finally breaking open. Rebecca folded her arms quietly. Has the account gone delinquent? Claire didn't answer. That terrified all of us. Claire, Rebecca repeated firmly. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. 3 payments behind. Andrew covered his face completely. No. I stared at the family photographs lining the hallway wall. Walter smiling beside the maple tree he planted. Andrew graduating college. Christmas mornings. Summer barbecues on the back deck. For decades, this house held every good memory we built together. And somehow beneath all those memories, something rotten quietly grew unnoticed. Rebecca suddenly looked toward the security monitor again. Then her expression changed. What's that timestamp? Andrew lowered his hands slowly. What? She pointed toward another alert flashing in the corner of the screen. Garage motion detected. Today. 11:03 a.m. Before brunch started. My pulse quickened instantly. Because none of us had been home at 11. We arrived together around 11:30 after church service. The foyer went silent again. Rebecca tapped the footage open carefully. The garage camera flickered onto the screen. At first the space looked empty. Then a black SUV slowly pulled into the driveway. And the second Claire saw who stepped out of the vehicle. She whispered something that made my entire body turn cold. Oh no. The garage footage played silently on the security monitor. A black SUV rolled slowly into the driveway beneath bright Mother's Day sunlight. And the second Claire saw who stepped out of the vehicle, she whispered, "Oh no." Every nerve inside my body tightened instantly. Andrew looked toward her sharply. What? But Claire already looked terrified. Not guilty anymore. Panicked. Rebecca paused the video frame carefully. A man in an expensive navy suit stepped out of the SUV carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. Mid-50s. Gray hair. Sunglasses. Professional. Dangerous. Andrew frowned. Who is that? Claire covered her mouth with shaking hands. That's Martin Hale. The name meant nothing to me. But Rebecca's face changed immediately. You're kidding. Andrew looked between them. Who? Rebecca answered first. He's a private asset recovery attorney. Cold spread through my chest. Asset recovery. That didn't sound like family paperwork anymore. That sounded like collection. Agencies. Lawsuits. Seizures. Claire stared at the paused image like she wanted to disappear. I thought he wouldn't come here. Andrew's voice lowered dangerously. Why would a recovery attorney come to Mom's house? Claire didn't answer fast enough. Rebecca already understood. Oh my God. I looked toward her. What? She turned slowly toward me. He's here because someone pledged this property against debt exposure. The foyer tilted around me for a second. No, Andrew grabbed the monitor tightly. Claire. Her eyes filled again. I only used the appraisal temporarily. Temporarily for what? His voice cracked through the house so sharply even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. Claire burst into tears again. The investors wanted collateral. Rebecca stared at her in disbelief. You tried leveraging a property you don't legally own? Claire looked completely shattered now. The business was collapsing. I suddenly understood everything all at once. The rushed paperwork. The forged signatures. The desperate transfer attempt. Claire wasn't trying to inherit the house someday anymore. She was trying to save herself immediately. Andrew paced toward the living room and back again, breathing unevenly. How much debt are we actually talking about? Silence. Then Claire whispered. Almost 600,000. My knees weakened instantly. Rebecca caught my arm before I lost balance.
600,000 dollars.
Walter worked his entire life avoiding debt because he believed debt eventually owns people. Now I finally understood the terror underneath that belief. Andrew stared blankly at his wife. You destroyed your life. Claire shook her head desperately. I thought the business would recover after spring launches. Rebecca folded her arms tightly. People don't forge property documents during temporary setbacks. The blunt truth landed heavily. Claire looked toward me suddenly. I never wanted you hurt. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because people always say that after causing irreversible damage. Outside, birds chirped softly in the backyard while sunlight reflected beautifully off Walter's old gardening tools near the fence. Mother's Day. Normal families were probably cutting cake right now. Meanwhile, inside my foyer, a recovery attorney sat frozen on security footage waiting downstairs while my family collapsed upstairs. Andrew looked at the timestamp again.
11:03 a.m.
We were still at church, he murmured. Rebecca nodded slowly. He came expecting an empty house. That realization sent another chill through me. Claire never expected us to see him, meaning this meeting was hidden intentionally. Rebecca restarted the footage. Martin Hale walked calmly toward the garage entry keypad and typed in a code. My stomach dropped instantly. He had access to the house? Claire covered her face completely. I gave him temporary entry. Andrew looked physically sick. You gave a debt attorney access to Mom's home? It was only for valuation review. Rebecca shook her head slowly. No. It was for asset verification. Claire started crying harder. The footage continued silently. Martin entered through the garage door and disappeared from camera view. Then another timestamp appeared.
11:17 a.m.
He exited carrying the leather folder noticeably thicker than before. My heartbeat quickened. What did he take? I whispered. Claire looked horrified. I don't know. Rebecca immediately disagreed. Yes, you do. The room went silent. As Rebecca was right. Claire knew exactly what happened here. Andrew sat heavily on the staircase again, staring blankly at the monitor. Then quietly, painfully, he asked, Were you planning to sell Mom's house without telling her? Claire inhaled sharply. No. But the answer sounded weak now. Fractured. Rebecca slowly picked up the property appraisal again. Asset leverage. Fraudulent deed transfer attempts. Unauthorized equity applications. She looked directly at Claire. This wasn't panic anymore. This was strategy. Claire broke down completely after hearing that. Full sobbing now. Not defensive. Not manipulative. Destroyed. I didn't know how to stop once everything started falling apart. The honesty of that sentence silenced all of us. 'Cause deep down, I think it was true. People don't ruin their lives in one giant decision. They ruin them step by step until the lies become too large to escape cleanly. Andrew stared toward the floor for several long seconds. Then suddenly his expression changed. What's in the folder? Rebecca frowned. What? The folder Hale carried out. My pulse quickened immediately, because I suddenly realized something terrifying. If Martin Hale removed original property documents from Walter's office, then this nightmare was far from over. Andrew looked toward the front door, and in a voice I barely recognized, he said, I'm going to find him. Andrew grabbed his car keys from the hallway table before anyone could stop him. I'm going to find him. Claire immediately stood. Andrew, no. But he was already moving toward the front door. Rebecca stepped forward quickly. Wait. Her voice carried enough authority to stop him halfway. Andrew turned around, breathing hard. What? Rebecca crossed her arms tightly. You confront a recovery attorney emotionally right now, and you'll make this situation worse. He walked into my mother's house. And if he already suspects fraud, he's documenting everything. The words landed heavily, because suddenly this wasn't only family chaos anymore. There could be legal investigations, evidence, official records. Walter always said panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy decisions destroy whatever survives the first disaster. Andrew looked exhausted now, not angry anymore, just shattered. He leaned against the wall near the staircase and closed his eyes briefly. Claire sat curled on the couch crying quietly while sunlight stretched across the foyer floor around her. I stared at the family portrait hanging above the staircase. Walter's favorite photo. All of us smiling during a 4th of July barbecue 5 summers ago. Back when trust still lived naturally inside this house. Rebecca gently took the security monitor from the table. I need to review every clip from today. Claire immediately stiffened. That frightened me again. Rebecca noticed too. What now? Claire looked toward the floor. There's another meeting. The room went silent instantly. Andrew slowly opened his eyes. What meeting? Claire's breathing became uneven. Hale wasn't the only person involved. Cold spread through my chest. No. Please no. Rebecca's voice turned sharper. Who else came here? Claire swallowed hard. A buyer. The word hit like ice water. Andrew stared at her in disbelief. You showed this house to buyers? It wasn't finalized. There's that word again. His voice cracked violently through the foyer. I physically flinched. Not from fear. From heartbreak. Because I had never heard my son sound so broken before. Claire covered her face again. I didn't know what else to do. Rebecca replayed more footage silently.
Timestamp 11:31 a.m.
A second vehicle entered the driveway.
Dork sedan.
A younger couple stepped out beside Martin Hale. The woman carried a tablet. The man studied the exterior of the house slowly, professionally. My stomach turned. They weren't visiting. They were evaluating. Rebecca paused the footage carefully. Real estate investors. Andrew stared at the screen blankly. You tried selling Mom's home while she was at church. Claire cried harder. It was supposed to be private. Private. Like secrecy somehow softened betrayal. I suddenly remembered Walter sanding the hardwood floors in this very foyer 30 years earlier while Andrew played toy trucks beside him. Walter believed homes carried emotional history inside them. Now strangers walked through ours measuring financial opportunity. That realization hurt more than the forged signature somehow. Rebecca fast-forwarded the footage. The couple toured the downstairs with Hale for almost 19 minutes. Kitchen. Living room. Back patio. My home reduced to an asset walkthrough. Then another timestamp appeared.
11:52 a.m.
The group entered Walter's office. My heartbeat quickened instantly. Rebecca slowed the footage carefully. The office camera showed Hale opening Walter's filing cabinet, while the younger couple looked through property documents. Then the woman pointed toward something on Walter's desk. Claire made a soft sound beside us. Oh God. Rebecca paused the footage. On the desk sat a folder labeled, Original Deed Records. Empty. The room stopped breathing. Andrew looked toward Claire slowly. Where are the original deeds? Claire burst into fresh tears immediately. Hale took them. I gripped the staircase railing tightly. No. No. Walter kept every original property document secured inside that office for decades. And now someone walked out carrying them like shopping paperwork. Rebecca's expression hardened instantly. That's very bad. Andrew looked panicked. What does that mean? It means Hale wasn't just reviewing assets. She looked toward me carefully. He was preparing legal leverage. The foyer suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Claire shook violently now. I thought he only needed copies. Rebecca stared at her in disbelief. You gave a debt attorney direct access to original ownership records? I panicked.
No, Rebecca answered quietly.
You escalated. The truth settled heavily over all of us. People don't lose everything in one catastrophic moment. They lose it through escalating bad decisions made under fear. Andrew sat down heavily on the staircase again and stared at the paused footage. Then quietly asked the question none of us wanted answered. Can they actually take the house? Silence. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. That terrified me. Finally she exhaled slowly. Not legally if we move fast. If. That word nearly broke me. Because suddenly Walter's house, the place where our son grew up, where we celebrated every Christmas morning, where I held my husband's hand while cancer slowly took him away, had become something vulnerable. Something threatened. I looked around the foyer slowly. The maple staircase Walter built himself. The family photographs. The antique clock inherited from his father. Every inch of this house carried pieces of our life. And somewhere beneath all those memories, greed had quietly entered wearing the face of family. Rebecca suddenly looked toward Andrew. We need an attorney immediately. Andrew nodded numbly. Then Claire whispered something so softly I almost missed it. There's one more thing. The room froze again. Andrew slowly lifted his head. And in a voice filled with pure exhaustion he asked, "What now?" Andrew's voice echoed through the foyer. What now? At this point all of us looked emotionally exhausted. Mother's Day brunch sat abandoned upstairs. The coffee had gone cold. Flowers still decorated the dining table while downstairs, a family stood buried beneath debt, forged documents and security footage. Claire looked like she might collapse completely. Rebecca folded her arms tightly. Just say it. Claire wiped tears from her face with shaking hands. The buyers, they made an offer. Silence. Heavy, terrible silence. Andrew stared at her blankly. What? Claire swallowed hard. Hale told them the property transfer would be completed within 60 days. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. 60 days. Walter's house, our house, already being discussed like inventory. I grabbed the staircase railing to steady myself. Rebecca's expression darkened instantly. He promised ownership before legal transfer finalized? Claire nodded weakly. Rebecca muttered something under her breath I couldn't fully hear. Probably because she suddenly understood this situation had crossed from desperation into dangerous territory. Andrew looked physically ill now. You were selling Mom's home before she even knew? Claire burst into tears again. I thought I could stop everything before it reached this point. There is no stopping point anymore. His voice cracked violently through the foyer. The sound shattered something inside me. Because Andrew wasn't only grieving betrayal anymore. He was grieving the version of his marriage he thought existed. Rebecca stepped toward the security monitor again. Did Hale leave any paperwork? Claire hesitated. Too long. Rebecca immediately noticed. Claire. There's a contract draft. Andrew closed his eyes briefly like he physically couldn't absorb another disaster. Where? Claire pointed weakly toward Walter's office upstairs. Rebecca moved instantly. I need to see it. Andrew followed behind her while I stayed frozen near the staircase for several seconds trying to breathe normally again. This house suddenly felt unfamiliar. Unsafe. Like strangers already owned pieces of it emotionally even if legally they didn't yet. I slowly climbed upstairs behind them. Walter's office looked exactly the same as before. Family photographs. Wood shelves. His old reading lamp beside the desk. Only. Now the room carried another presence too. Violation. Rebecca immediately began searching through the remaining folders while Andrew sat heavily on the couch staring blankly at the floor. Claire lingered near the doorway crying softly. Then Rebecca found it. A blue folder partially hidden beneath estate documents. She opened it carefully. And the room went silent all over again. Purchase intent agreement. Estimated closing window. 60-90 days. Projected sale value. $2.8 million. Potential equity recovery allocation. Outstanding debt obligations. My chest tightened painfully. Walter's life work reduced to numbers on paper. Andrew slowly stood. Then read another line aloud in disbelief. Current occupant relocation support package. Occupant. Not owner. Occupant. I suddenly felt sick. Claire covered her mouth immediately. I never signed the final agreement. Rebecca looked directly at her. You got far enough to negotiate relocation terms for his mother. The bluntness of that sentence destroyed Andrew. I saw it happen. He physically turned away from Claire like looking at her hurt too much. Walter used to say there are moments in marriage when trust either deepens forever or cracks permanently. I think this was that moment. Claire stepped toward Andrew desperately. Please look at me. He didn't. That silence hurt her more than shouting ever could. Rebecca kept reviewing the folder carefully. Then suddenly her expression changed. What is this? Andrew looked up slowly. Rebecca held another page toward us. Loan default escalation notice. Final recovery review pending. My stomach dropped. Because beneath the notice sat a handwritten note from Hale. If transfer fails, secondary recovery options will proceed. The room turned ice cold. Andrew frowned. What does secondary recovery mean? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. That terrified me. Finally she looked toward Claire. What other assets did you connect to these debts? Claire's breathing became uneven again. No, Rebecca's voice sharpened. What other assets? Fresh tears streamed down Claire's face. The retirement accounts. My vision blurred for a second. No, please no.
Ist daher.
My retirement? Claire nodded weakly without looking at me. I used them as supporting financial references. Andrew slammed his hand against Walter's desk so hard the framed photographs rattled. Are you insane? Claire sobbed uncontrollably now. I thought the business would recover. There's that fantasy again, Rebecca snapped quietly. The room fell silent. Because deep down, everyone understood the same terrible truth now. This stopped being about saving a business long ago. Claire became addicted to the belief that one more deal, one more launch, one more delay could magically erase consequences. Walter hated gambling for exactly this reason. Not because of money, because gambling teaches people reality is negotiable. I looked around Walter's office slowly while grief settled heavily into my chest. This room once felt safe. Walter balanced checkbooks here. Wrapped Christmas presents here. Held my hand here the night we learned his cancer returned. Now the same room held evidence folders and debt contracts threatening everything he spent his life protecting. Rebecca carefully closed the blue folder. Then she looked directly at me. Aunt Linda, we need emergency legal protection filed tomorrow morning. I nodded slowly. My voice barely came out. Do whatever protects the house. Andrew looked toward me instantly after hearing that. And for the first time all day, I saw tears finally fall from my son's eyes. I had not seen my son cry since Walter's funeral. Even as a little boy, Andrew rarely cried in front of people. He carried pain quietly the same way Walter did. But standing inside his father's office on Mother's Day with legal documents scattered across the desk, something inside him finally broke. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by the tears, but nobody pretended not to notice. Because at this point there was no dignity left inside the disaster. Only truth. Rebecca carefully organized the paperwork into separate piles across Walter's desk. Fraudulent transfer documents, loan applications, debt notices, potential sale agreements. Every page looked colder than the last. Claire sat silently in the corner of the office now, completely hollowed out. She had cried so much her face looked exhausted beyond emotion. And strangely that frightened me more. Walter used to say people become dangerous when panic turns into numbness. I slowly lowered myself into his old chair beside the desk. Outside the office windows, sunlight still warmed the backyard maple trees Walter planted decades ago. Spring birds moved between branches peacefully. The world kept looking beautiful despite everything happening inside this room. I suddenly remembered the day Walter finished building the office shelves. Andrew was 16 then. Walter spent 2 weekends staining every board by hand because he wanted something solid that lasts longer than trends. That sentence echoed painfully now, because nothing about today felt solid anymore. Rebecca finally looked up from the paperwork. I'm going to be honest. With everyone. Nobody answered. I think we were all too emotionally exhausted for false comfort anymore. She exhaled slowly. This situation is serious. Andrew nodded numbly. I figured that out. No, Rebecca said quietly. I mean legally serious. The room went silent again. Claire lowered her head immediately. Rebecca continued carefully. Attempted deed fraud, forged witness authorization, unauthorized financial leverage using property ownership and retirement references, She paused briefly. If Hale decides to protect himself legally, he may cooperate fully with investigators. My stomach tightened. Investigators. Police. Courtrooms. This family suddenly stood much closer to disaster than I ever imagined possible. Andrew looked toward Claire slowly. Did you understand any of that could happen? Fresh tears slid silently down Claire's face. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Rebecca answered softly but firmly. That's usually when people destroy their lives. Nobody argued with her. Because she was right. Claire didn't wake up one morning planning to betray this family. She drifted there gradually through fear, debt, pride, and desperation until reality itself became something she tried avoiding instead of facing. But understanding the path does not erase the damage at the end of it. Andrew finally sat beside the desk again, then quietly asked the question hanging over all of us. Can Mom lose the house? Rebecca shook her head slowly. Not if we move fast. If. That word again. I closed my eyes briefly. Walter worked 40 years making sure I would never fear losing this home after he died. And now here I sat wondering whether strangers might someday walk through these rooms legally claiming ownership rights because my own family panicked under debt. Claire suddenly spoke from the corner. I'll sign whatever fixes this. Andrew looked at her with exhausted disbelief. You think signatures are the problem now? The pain in his voice nearly broke me again. Does he still loved her? That was obvious. Even after everything. Love doesn't disappear instantly when trust dies. Sometimes it lingers painfully beside the wreckage wondering what happened. Claire wiped her face slowly. I know you hate me. Andrew looked away toward the window. No, he whispered. For a moment Claire looked hopeful. Then he quietly finished. I just don't know who you are anymore. The silence afterward felt endless. Because that was the real tragedy underneath everything. Not the house. Not the money. Identity. The person Andrew thought he married no longer existed in his mind. Or maybe she never did. Rebecca carefully closed the final folder. Tomorrow morning we contact a real estate fraud attorney, notify the county office, freeze all transfer activity, and formally dispute every unauthorized filing. Andrew nodded once. Claire stayed silent. Then Rebecca looked directly at me. Aunt Linda. There's something else you need to prepare for. Cold moved through my chest again. What now? She hesitated briefly. Hale may already have copies of everything. The room turned still. Rebecca continued carefully. If these files circulated through lenders or investors, reversing the legal trail could take months. Months. My heart sank. Months of lawyers. Investigations. Fear. Walter's peaceful home transformed into paperwork and conflict. I looked around the office quietly. The family photograph still smiled back from the shelves. Walter holding baby Andrew near the fireplace. Christmas mornings. Fishing trips. Birthdays. Entire decades frozen inside frames while the real family outside them slowly fractured apart. Then suddenly Claire began crying again. But differently this time. Not panic. Grief. I destroyed this family, she whispered. Nobody answered immediately. Because honestly, part of it was true. But another part wasn't. Families don't collapse from one bad person alone. They collapse from silence. Avoidance. Bride. People hiding fear until fear starts making decisions for them. I slowly stood from Walter's chair and walked toward the doorway. The house felt strangely quiet now. Heavy. Like it was listening. Then I turned back toward all of them. My son. My broken daughter-in-law. My exhausted niece sorting legal evidence on Mother's Day. And quietly, painfully, I said the thing Walter probably understood long before any of us did. This house was never the real thing we almost lost. Nobody spoke after I said it. This house was never the real thing we almost lost. Walter's office fell completely silent. Outside, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the backyard while wind moved gently through the maple trees he planted decades ago. The same trees that shaded birthday parties, graduation dinners, summer barbecues, ordinary family moments that once felt permanent. I looked around the room slowly. Andrew sat exhausted beside his father's desk. Claire curled silently into herself near the bookshelf, emotionally destroyed. Rebecca organized evidence folders with the calm precision of someone trying to stop disaster before it spread further. And suddenly I realized something painful. The house was never the heart of this family. Trust was. And trust had nearly died here. The next several weeks passed in a blur of attorneys, affidavits, bank meetings, and county hearings. Rebecca stayed longer than planned to help untangle the legal mess before returning to Chicago. Without her, I honestly don't know what would have happened. The fraudulent transfer request was frozen before completion. The equity application was formally disputed. Martin Hale disappeared the moment attorneys became involved officially. Apparently men like him preferred vulnerable people over legal fights. Walter would have hated everything about him. Claire's business collapsed within 2 months. The investors withdrew. The debts remained. And for the first time in years, there were no carefully staged social media photos pretending life was perfect anymore. Oddly enough, that was probably the healthiest thing that happened, because pretending finally stopped. Andrew moved into a small apartment temporarily, while he and Claire separated. Not dramatically, not viciously, just sadly. I think sadness destroys marriages more quietly than anger ever could. Sometimes love survives betrayal. Sometimes trust doesn't. And eventually people realize those are not always the same thing. Emma, my granddaughter, visited often during that summer. One evening she sat with me on the back porch watching fireflies appear across the yard, while Walter's wind chimes moved softly overhead. "Dad looks older," she whispered. He did. Pain ages people differently than time does. I looked out toward the garden Walter spent years building with his own hands. "Your father lost something too," I said quietly. Emma nodded slowly. "I know. That was the strange thing about this whole nightmare. There were no real winners. Only survivors trying to rebuild themselves after truth finally surfaced." Claire came to the house one rainy afternoon in September. Not carrying paperwork this time. Not carrying plans. Just carrying herself honestly for once. She stood nervously in the foyer while rainwater dripped from her umbrella onto the hardwood floors Walter installed by hand 30 years earlier. "I wanted to apologize properly," she whispered. I studied her quietly. She looked different now. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally stripped down. The performance was gone. No expensive designer clothes. No polished image. No perfect life carefully curated for strangers online. Just a tired woman standing inside the damage she created. "I know sorry isn't enough," she continued softly.
No, iyan suara tunasli.
"It isn't." Tears filled her eyes immediately. But this time she didn't defend herself. Didn't explain. Didn't rationalize. That mattered more than she probably realized. We sat together in the kitchen for nearly an hour afterward while rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time since Walter died, the house finally felt honest again. Painful, but honest. Claire eventually admitted something that stayed with me long afterward. "I kept thinking success would make everyone safe," she whispered. I remembered Walter saying almost the opposite once. "Safety doesn't come from money," he told Andrew years ago. "It comes from people telling each other the truth before things get dangerous." Now I finally understood exactly what he meant. Mother's Day returned the following year quietly.
No elaborat brunch. No stage photographs. No pretending.
Just family. Real family. Andrew brought flowers like Walter used to. Emma made pancakes badly enough that Walter would have laughed for hours. Rebecca joined us again and insisted on handling coffee because apparently none of us could be trusted near expensive kitchen appliances anymore. Even Claire came. Not as someone trying to own part of this house. Just as someone trying carefully to re-enter a family she nearly destroyed. Trust didn't magically return. That's not how real life works. But honesty did. And honestly, that mattered more. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone inside Walter's office while golden sunset light filled the room softly. His reading glasses still rested beside the desk lamp exactly where he left them before the hospital. Some things never stop hurting. But some things survive anyway. I looked around the office slowly. The shelves. The photographs. The blueprints framed on the wall. Walter built this house believing it would protect the family after he was gone. For a while I thought he failed. But sitting there in the quiet evening light, I realized something important. The house didn't fail us. The truth saved us before the lies became permanent. Outside, the maple trees moved gently in the wind while sunlight faded across the backyard. And for the first time in a very long while, this house finally felt like home again. Bottom of form.